But I think Texas is an interesting place. I think Tom Herman kind of exemplifies the growing trend amongst ADs who want to hire known commodities, but they want to hire younger. They're looking for guys who can provide 10, 15, 20 years of coaching to that institution, but they also want guys who can relate to the young players. I think that's why you haven't seen Les Miles' name bounced around a lot. If you look back at last year's cycle, Justin Fuente was probably your marquee name. You look at this cycle, you had P.J. Fleck, who's still at Western Michigan, Tom Herman, Scott Frost, a lot of young guys, guys who maybe have a little bit more experience, and your Les Mileses and your Charlie Strongs might not be getting as much play as some of your younger guys like Tom Herman. So I think the hire at Texas, I think Tom Herman represents that new trend, a guy who's younger, doesn't have any a Power 5 coaching experience pulling him up from the G5 ranks, but it's still a solid hire. I think the biggest issue in Texas is the internal discussions. Of course, they're coming off of the athletic director transition from Patterson's firing earlier in the year. And I think Patterson, my personal opinion is he kind of really he didn't destroy the Texas athletic department, because that would be hard to do for one guy, but he really set the Texas athletic department back many years. Just a horrible hire for an athletic director. So they're kind of having to come out of that Patterson era, the entire Texas athletic department. Of course, you have a lot of the donor issues with Red McCombs and his influence with that program as well. They were very unhappy with Charlie Strong. So Tom Herman obviously sees that, and Charlie Strong was a good coach, and so Herman knows that he's got to get on the sides of the donors. But I think that's probably commonplace everywhere. Here's, I think, the biggest issue that Herman and the Texas athletic department has to face going forward as far as the health of the program. Texas has never really had to compete for the state of Texas as much as they have now. In the past, sometimes Texas A&M has been nationally ranked and has threatened Texas a little bit. But these days you have Texas and you have TCU, Baylor, Texas A&M, and Houston, all with very strong programs and all making inroads into Texas. And with increased budgets and national television contracts, any school can come into Texas. Time, distance, and money is not much of a factor. So if you're Alabama or USC or Tennessee or Michigan, you can fly your coaches in for a weekend and get to 4 or 5 games down here in Texas to see those high school athletes. So I think Texas has to work a little bit harder. Having said that, you're right. They're a historic program. They've got all the money in the world with a Longhorn network. So it is still a premier job, but it's not as easy to win there as it has been in the past. I'm eager to see how Herman does there. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, so Charlie Strong, yes, the stage isn't as big at Louisville, but he got it to the big stage games. He got them to the Sugar Bowl. They defeated a top 5 to 10 Florida team in the Sugar Bowl. So I don't know that he was actually overwhelmed by the level of football. Maybe he was overwhelmed by the situation there in Texas, but is there any reason to believe that Tom Herman can succeed someplace where Charlie Strong couldn't?
Well, I think the coaching styles are different. I think Tom Herman comes from a more disciplinary background. Charlie Strong's a great coach, but the dossier on Charlie Strong is he's very player friendly and does not enforce a lot of discipline amongst his players. Tom Herman, while he is known to be compassionate to players and build strong bonds with his players, is also comes from that disciplinary background. So I think that's the major difference. As far as the X's and O's, they're probably comparable. Don't forget that when Charlie Strong was winning at Louisville, the ACC wasn't nearly as strong as it is now. Nor was his competition at Louisville when he was there at Louisville. So I think X's and O's, there might not be that much of a difference. Charlie Strong's a great football coach. I think the difference between Charlie Strong and Tom Herman is going to be how they interact with the players and how they manage the program from a standards and discipline perspective, and getting the guys bought into a program and executing the coach's vision for the program.
Texas football players have been leaving Texas. They've been going to the SEC. They've been going to places like USC and Ohio State. I saw some numbers recently where only 40% of the state's top 150 players over the last couple of years have stayed in Texas. there are schools like Ohio State, there are schools like USC, and several SEC schools who have more players going to the current 2017 top 100, 150 list going to those schools than actually going to the University of Texas from the state of Texas. So, of course, he's got to fix that issue.
Yeah, Mark, I talked about that. I don't know earlier. I don't know that's necessarily a Texas issue, as it speaks to the state of college football today. Recruiting budgets are in the millions of dollars these days. Coaches can fly in to Texas, and the way the state playoffs are, and the way that Texas does their high school football games, you can see 2 games in San Antonio and then go up and see 2 games in Austin, or you can see 2 games in Dallas on Friday and 2 games in Houston on Saturday. So with the recruiting budgets in the millions of dollars, with donors who give coaches their aircraft to fly coast to coast, and with the increase in technology with huddle film, these coaches can see hundreds more per assistant coach players than they could 10 years ago, and certainly more than they could 20 years ago. So it's easier for these coaches from Ohio State, Alabama, USC, Oregon, Tennessee, Michigan to see and identify the talent they want to target in Texas. And then it's also easier for them to get down here to Texas to see them in person because of the increase in budget and the increase in what donors will let them have, specifically with borrowing aircraft. So I don't know that's as much about Texas, the University of Texas, as it is about other programs being able to get into Texas easier. The other issue is there's just a ton of talent in Texas. So, Texas can only have 85 scholarship guys on their roster. So if there's 300 3-stars and above in Texas, you can only get 85. The other 115 have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, this freshman defensive lineman for Houston, Ed Oliver, was actually brought in by Tom Herman, and he's turned out to be an exceptional football player, and he is the highest-rated recruit ever signed by a Group of 5 program, and Tom Herman, of course, able to reel him into the University of Houston. Also saw a figure that I found pretty fascinating, that going into this season over the past couple of recruiting classes and looking at actually the entirety of the Houston roster, that coaching staff only had to travel an average of 28 miles per player. It was the closest proximity of a roster of players going to one school than anybody in the country. They were playing Oklahoma. This was the week 1 matchup, and Oklahoma, on the other hand, in going to places like California and most notably going to Texas, had to travel almost 400 miles per player. So the resources saved by the University of Houston, and if Major Applewhite can likewise do the same thing, there are enough players right there, especially for an American Conference program, to sustain it and thrive.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mark. And again, that speaks more to the state of college football than it does the University of Texas. Ed Oliver is the only scout 5-star player to sign with a Group of 5 school. You're absolutely right, the highest-rated guy there. And you're right about Houston being a hotbed with Katy there and Cinco Ranch High School. Oklahoma, perfect example. Oklahoma has to come to Lake Travis High School to get Baker Mayfield. Of course, he went the circuitous route to Texas Tech, but Oklahoma's starting quarterback is an Austin guy from right there in the shadows of Darrell K. Royal Stadium down there at Lake Travis High School. So Texas has a ton of talent. But these guys, again, these budgets these days, millions of dollars, coaches can fly anywhere they want. But it's such a benefit because time is such a benefit, or time is such a valuable resource for these coaches. I think there's only, off the top of my head, I think there's only 21 days in the entire calendar for in-home visits for college coaches. I might have that a couple of days off, but it's not as much as you would think. It's somewhere around 3 weeks plus or minus a couple of days. So that time is very important. So if you're a school that lives far away from a recruiting base, you have to travel or you have to work the phones. And, of course, those in-person visits where you get to meet mom and dad and the favorite teacher and the high school coach, those are so critical to getting those top talent guys. Of course, I live in Texas, but I'm from the Southeast. One of the great mysteries in life is why Georgia Tech can't. Atlanta is one of those super rich areas, just like Houston, Dallas, Miami, as far as football recruiting. But those guys who live in those cities, Miami, Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, the Southeast Louisiana area, New Orleans, those are tremendous benefits to be a coach at one of those programs because you can visit 4 or 5 guys in a day as opposed to just 2 or 3, 4 or 5 over a week or a weekend.
Yeah, the last figures I saw was that Atlanta produced the most NFL players for a metropolitan area in the U.S.
For a metropolitan area, and I think the state of Louisiana is per capita the biggest contributor of NFL talent amongst states per capita.
So the other jobs we don't have to speak to specifically, but it almost follows the same formula. You've got the group of five, the American Conference coach who does well, and then bam is off to, in this case, Matt Rhule, moving on from Temple, where that program has been in the ashes most of its history. He wins 10 games 2 consecutive years. Fine football coach, takes over a troubled Baylor program. Willie Taggart going from South Florida, where they started off 2-10 during his tenure there, and suddenly they're a 10-2 football team. So he, of course, did the job, and he rushes off to Oregon. You can't blame him as well, taking over those kind of facilities, although the recruiting base a bit sparse there up in the Northwest, so it may be difficult for Oregon to keep pace with the likes of Stanford and USC. Just your thoughts about those jobs and the status of those jobs, because those are two very similar programs in regards to their status on the national map. They are not powerhouses. They are not elite programs going back decades, but they've made a big splash recently, Oregon more so, in getting to 2 national championship games, but even Baylor becoming a fixture in the top 10 or 15 in the nation over the last few years under Art Briles.
Yeah, Mark, I think except for the weather, I think Willie Taggart got the best of those two schools. I think Oregon's in a much better position. Not a lot of heavy recruiting in Oregon, but he does have close access to Northern California, some quality recruits coming out of Northern California. And again, you can only have 85 guys on a team. So once you get down into that Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego area, those high schools down there, that's a talent-rich environment. USC and UCLA can only have 85 guys. Oregon has the money, of course. Big donors backing them. Phil Knight, most especially. Plus, they can sell with their marketing and their uniforms. They're a great sell and recruiting trail. Great stadium, great home environment. They still have a lot of talent there. They're in a Power 5 conference, and they've had recent success. So I think Oregon's a good job, great job to go to. I think they're going to have to give Taggart a clothing allowance to buy some cold weather gear coming from Florida. But I think he got the better end of that. Baylor, yes, they're in Texas, a lot of recruiting, but you can see with Oregon that the foundation is set for sustained success if you get a quality coach in there, and I think Taggart's a quality coach. With Baylor, they're kind of up there, but it doesn't seem like there's a big foundation set for sustained success. They've got to stay there. They continue to have to earn that. And that's such a that program right now is mired in black eye with the scandals there. And I know they're trying to come in with a new face, a new coach, a new university president, some new athletic administrators and all that stuff. But that's going to hang around that program for a while. That's a very it's a national issue that has a lot of visibility. You're still going to have players for the next 2 or 3 years who are part of the Art Briles era. So Matt Rhule, he's, in addition to recruiting against the other big schools in Texas and recruiting against the other schools that come into Texas, and in addition to having to win in a Big 12 conference where parity is where most of the teams are very close, maybe except for Oklahoma, he's also going to have to work the media, the national media, and at the same time repair the reputation of Baylor. It's very hard to coach in the Power 5 these days. It's ultra competitive. The margin of error is very slim. So every other thing that you pile up on a coach adds to that and takes away from that time. And repairing Baylor's image is one of the things that Matt Rhule is going to have to do, and it's going to take away from his time to recruit and time to prepare. So I definitely think Willie Taggart probably went to the better, more healthy program there, although both I think are great coaches.
Tom Allen takes over for Kevin Wilson in a very different situation, coaching transition there in Bloomington at Indiana. Kevin Wilson had done a fine job on the football field in winning football games and getting Indiana to back-to-back postseason appearances. But, of course, the issues with mistreatment of players, and Tom Allen takes over there at Indiana. Major Applewhite, of course, moving into the Houston job as first offensive coordinator, making the transition as head coach. Got to hit you up on this Lane Kiffin situation. Were you surprised that once the Houston job went away and the LSU job that Lane Kiffin just didn't wait it out as a offensive coordinator at a premier program. Of course, currently at Alabama, there was thoughts about him going to LSU as offensive coordinator, but taking the head coaching job at Florida Atlantic.
No, Mark, I'm not too surprised. Lane Kiffin wasn't going to be at Alabama next year. He was either going to join forces with Ed Orgeron at LSU, or he was going to take a head coaching job somewhere. I think he really wanted to be a head coach somewhere. I think it's a win-win scenario for both Florida Atlantic and Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin has established for all of his off-the-field shenanigans, he has established himself as a premier offensive mind in the game, particularly as a premier play caller. And he has shown in his past that he can recruit. I don't think that it's going to really matter what he does on the field at FAU as far as in terms of wins and losses. When it comes next coaching cycle in 2 or 3 years, people start looking at him as a head coach candidate. I don't think the wins and losses are going to matter that much. What athletic directors are going to be looking for and university presidents are going to be looking for is, has he matured as a head coach? And that's what's going to determine whether or not he gets another shot as a head coach. Of course, he's been in the job for a couple of days, and he's already kind of fallen back into that Lane Kiffin stereotype. Hired his brother as the defensive coordinator there, Chris Kiffin, and his first recruit was the quarterback DeAndre Johnson, if I got the last name right, who was dismissed from Florida State, I believe, for some disciplinary issues. So, that's kind of pretty telling for Lane Kiffin's first 2 significant actions at Florida Atlantic. The school gets a lot of publicity out of it. Of course, everybody's going to be watching the next year, next 2 years, however long he's there, about how he's doing. So they'll have more attention on them. I think he is being tested. He's being looked at by athletic directors and presidents solely on the question of, has he matured as a head football coach. And of course, you can read into that what you want, but I don't think he's going to be measured so much on the wins and losses as his demeanor and actions off the field. So I think it's a win-win. I'm not surprised. I think it benefits both Kiffin and Florida Atlantic.